Hello, 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 everyone. It's great to see you all. I see a lot of people have already started. Hi, I'm London. I'll be facilitating with you for a little bit tonight. I see Carolyn from Washington, Angela from Delaware. Hello to Syracuse. It's great to see you. Great to have you all here. Hope you have been having a pretty good week. We're almost done. It's almost Friday. This is very exciting. Hello from New Orleans or hello to New Orleans. Good to see you as well. Amazing, amazing. Oh, St. Louis, amazing. Another Syracuse. A lot of people from Syracuse. Shout out. Goodness gracious. You guys are really showing out. Hi, Julie. It's good to see you. Hello, Josh. Feel free to put your name, pronouns, where you're coming from, all that jazz. A lot of you are doing that already. Thank you so much. Very, very helpful. Hello from North California. In Texas. Oh my goodness, I lived in Texas, so this is very exciting. We're basically sisters, and it's really amazing what we're doing here. With that being said, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, amazing. So training is better with a partner, as you probably know by now. This is our sixth training, everyone. This is very exciting. If you have a partner, then feel free to like sort of go on mute. I'll show you how to do that later. Or if you don't have one, call someone up, give them a little chat, give them a text or something like that, and let them know you're at this really cool training where you're learning how to mobilize and what that looks like, and you would love for them to come, and then you guys can be partners together, and it's amazing, and all that jazz. And then we can do it during breakouts or any other questions that some of our organizers have you at are asking you all. So feel free to do that. And then I think someone will probably put in the chat what that will look like. We have a sample text that you guys can use. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, amazing. Just a little bit more. We're going to do a quick icebreaker. So if you're in person, Google Meet, FaceTime, anything like that, you can just exit the audio and then join back later. I'm going to show you how to do that, but it's just like the little carrot that you'll see on Zoom. And then if you're in a big group, you can just feel free to do the same thing. You can mute us and then do your thing. So if we go to the next slide, please. This is going to be the slide that tells you how to get out of the audio for Zoom. So you're going to go to the bottom left of your screen. As you can see, there's an audio. Then you'll click the caret. And then as you can see in the photo to the right, you'll go to the leave computer audio. Once you click that, you'll be out. You won't be able to hear me for about 2 minutes until you join back again, which is going to be super easy. And as you can see, it just says join audio. And then may I get the next slide, please? Amazing. This is our actual icebreaker. So, for this icebreaker, if you're by yourself, no worries. Just feel free to put in the chat. And if you're with other people, put in the chat there too. So, what's one small act of care or solidarity you've experienced or offered recently? This is a really good one. I feel like a lot of you all have done a lot of this. If you've hosted a Mayday Strong event, oh my goodness, that's an easy one. If you participated in the hands-off events, another good one. I feel like there's a lot, and I know that a lot of you all are hosts for that, so this is very exciting. Okay, I see Julie was doing volunteering for greeting table at a protest. See, there we go. Bought lunch for a city worker. Amazing. Thank you, Angela. Getting tea with fellow community organizers. I love that so much. And I feel like that also like kind of brings in the self-care aspect. You're doing so much for so many other people. It's amazing that you did that with some of your friends. Prayer circle to offer support. Very nice, very nice. Oh, Jennifer sang. Okay, good. I love that. Okay, let's see. Oh, chat it with someone at a party. Very nice. Thank you, Cheryl. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Also, everyone like literally just look, this is so amazing. It's so exciting. Someone else protested in DC. With that being said, I'll go to the next slide now. Okay, so I'll do a quick thank you to some of our partners. The NAACP is a huge one who's been helping us so much, and we're really grateful. The Workers Circle, obviously, as well. I want to huge shout out to Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice. I know I gave them a shout out last time. They bring so many people, it's insane. So I want to do a really big shout out to them. Like I said, NAACP as well, corporate accountability. Just very thankful for all of our partners. And with that being said, I'll go to the next slide. Amazing. So I'll tell you all a little bit about tonight's agenda. So we're going to do a welcome and overview, which you're watching me do right now. Then we're gonna have an action ask for No Kings / Flag Day. I'm sure that a lot of you have already heard of that. There's so many events, so I'm sure you probably are doing it as well. Then we'll have a digital hygiene training. Thank you, Eric. And then we'll do an in-depth training on mutual aid and structures for stronger local organizing. This is very, very exciting, sorry. And then also wanting to note that captioning is available for Zoom. So if you do have or if you want captions at all, you're just going to go turn it on to live transcriptions. You'll see more or CC. Click it. Thank you, Destiny, so much for putting that in the chat. And with that being said, I think I'll be passing it. So I'll pass it to just kidding. I'm not passing it, and I will be doing this timeline update. So, this is the rest of it. This is it. You guys have been amazing and stuck with us through all of our trainings, and we're very thankful. Obviously, tonight it's for mutual aid and structures for stronger local organizing. Then we have 3 more to go until June 5th. So, if you don't have any friends with you tonight, Caden just put a sample text or email you can use to invite someone and tell them to come to the other 3. We have more, so it works out. And with that being said, I actually am done. And thank you so much for your time. And I'll be passing it to Caden.
Hi all, it's Caden. I'm an organizer with Public Citizen. It's so great to see so many of you on tonight's call. Really quickly wanted to go through the ethos as we usually do on these calls tonight. So we try to really be Big Ten. We want to encourage progressive through conservatives to be welcomed as participants and presenters on these calls, and provided that we're united in support of a democratic republic and stopping Trump's authoritarian power grab. We want to be welcoming here. We want to be love-centered, joyful, connection-focused, and we want to have our in-person gatherings be that way, our virtual space be that way for every training as much as possible. We want to continuously outreach and recruit folks, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment here, but that's why we include our outreach tip every week. We can't win without bringing new folks into this space, and we can't just be restrained to the organizing spaces we're already in. Deep training on organizing skills for working and organizing under autocracy. That's what this whole training series is about. And so we're trying to give you concrete actions and steps that you can take. We're calling in instead of calling out partners and hosts privately if they use othering or unwelcoming language. Again, going back to those first couple points, we want to be as accepting and Big Ten as possible here. And so we're making sure we're calling in other folks if they use othering language. So next slide, please. And then we're also non-violent. We never support violent tactics here on the Rise for Freedom training series. There's a universe of nonviolent direct action tactics, which are a part of the response to autocratic moves and democratic backsliding around the world. These are part of the story of how different countries and people have been able to protect or move towards democracy. And we want to use that vast range of tactics that are nonviolent that we can use. On these calls, we're not going to ask anyone to break the law, nor will we tell any attendees how to do those nonviolent direct action tactics. And Rise for Freedom trainings are nonpartisan, so we don't partner with any party groups. And if you've tried to partner with us and you are a partisan group or a local party committee, you probably didn't hear back, and that's just because these things are nonpartisan. All of our partners, we're all doing this in a nonpartisan way. So we're all here to protect democracy, and I'll go to the next slide with that. So I'm going to kick it off to my colleague Akine, who's going to run our polls tonight. So off to you, Akine.
Thanks. So if you've been with us before, you know we like to know what you're up to, what you're willing to do, and if you're new, welcome. We'd love to know, would you be willing to host or help host one or more of these Rise for Freedom trainings over the coming weeks? We're going to have a few more through June 5th, every Thursday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific, and all the time zones before and after Pacific. Some of you are hosting right now. Thrilled that you're doing that. Thank you so much. Please let us know how we can support you. Some of you are filling out the form that Becker is going to be putting in the chat if he hasn't already. Some of you are looking for a venue. Some of you are a maybe, and we'll follow up with you. Some of you can't commit right now, but you're organizing for June 14th, the No Kings events all over the country on Flag Day. And some of you are doing other stuff and doing what you can. Appreciate that. Next question, we're going to be talking about No Kings, No Kings actions at nokings.org. It's a coalition event, Indivisibles throwing down on, and many others, including Public Citizen. And we want to make sure that folks hear loud and clear that lots and lots and lots of people want to live in a vibrant, inclusive democracy. They don't want a king, they don't want an autocrat. So some of you are part of hosting one. You can also answer yes, but I'm looking to see if I need to host, or maybe someone already is hosting by going to kings.org. A bunch of you are planning to attend. And others are looking to see nearby if there is one to attend, and some of you have other plans. It is the 250th anniversary of the Army. We are not doing events in the US Capitol. There will be a different big event happening then, but we are going to be waving our flags and showing the kind of inclusive democratic action in a country that we love. Next question. So we've been working on talking to people that we disagree with. We cannot protect and make more inclusive and healthier our democracy if we don't bring in more people. So we did a training about a month ago on how to talk to people that might disagree with you. So we're curious, how are those conversations going if you're having them, whether you came to the training or not? Did you have your one-on-ones? Are you still working on getting them? Were they really hard? Did they go great? Is this your jam? Is this how you're going to serve the movement? Some of you were asking you if you haven't had a chance to do your one-on-ones yet, maybe a commitment in the chat right now will help you. So answer the poll and then go to the chat and say, this is who I'm going to ask to do my one-on-one. Maybe it's John or Pat or Kiara, or you can put, I don't know anyone I disagree with actually, so I need to go somewhere new that I haven't gone before to meet some people I might disagree with, and put where you're going to go. Maybe it's the corner bakery, maybe it's the farmer's market, maybe it's the farm show. So thank you for answering that question. And some of you aren't in a good place to talk to folks you disagree with. That's okay. There's things for everyone to do in this movement. We'd love to know how old you are. We're just curious. We want to try to serve everybody here. And also, we're just curious who we're working with. And then finally, we want to know if you want to do trainings like this in person, if you want to be part of hosting trainings like this, if you can only be at a training if it's virtual, and if you're just going to move on to other things once this training series is over, or even today is over. So that is our set of questions. At least half of you participated, so we're going to wrap. Thank you all for throwing down. And back to my next slide. And Kate.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for filling out the polls and taking the time to do that. I do want to make a quick action ask for June 14th. We have our No Kings Day that's coming up then. And on June 14th, Flag Day, Donald Trump, he wants tanks in the street. He wants a made-for-TV display of dominance for his birthday. It's also the birthday of the Army, but a spectacle meant to look like strength, but real power we know isn't staged in Washington. It's you, it's me, it's all of us in our democracy together across the country. And so what he's trying to do is this really autocratic show of force, and we want to protest it across the country. And so you can find and join an action near you at nokings.org. Again, that's nokings.org. That link will be in the chat. And so encourage you to find a mobilization near you. There won't be any in DC itself, but there will be around and across the country. And so I know we already have hundreds of events on the map and hoping to have more by the time, we're only about a month away. But we already have so many events on the map. And so really looking forward to this being a huge day of action, looking forward to seeing you on the streets. And again, where we can peacefully say that this, we're not going to stand for this waste of taxpayer dollars and this autocratic show of force, and that real power is found in the people, not in a king. So also flagging for everyone that there's a planning and promotion training for folks who are interested in hosting or organizing local actions and mobilizations near them. That's on June 7th, and the link will also be put in the chat shortly. So going on to the next slide, please. Cool. So also wanted to talk a little bit about outreach tonight, real quick, but 3 steps that we have to building outreach. First, we always hear, maybe if you've organized in this space for a little while or ever since the inauguration, you might have heard of this magic number, 3.5%, that a lot of folks have been talking about, but it's really a tried and true and researched number that from many anti-authoritarian movements around the globe and through history has been researched that, if we hit that critical mass, we're able to move the pillars of support for the authoritarian regime. And it's not necessarily like a magic universal number that we're always bound to win if we hit it, but generally speaking, if we reach that capacity, that critical mass, we're able to cause real change and upset the authoritarian and really have a display of democracy. And so how we get to this number, how we build up capacity to 3.5%, the first step is to recruit. It's to mobilize people to June 14th. And I'm going to apply this in what we're doing here and now. It's to mobilize people to June 14th and to these trainings every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, to continue strategizing how to resist. And so yes, bring people on the streets, but also bring people to this space where you can learn those long-term tactics. 2, build capacity. Increase the number of people you turned out to your last training or action. So the last action was May Day. So if you brought 3 people in your community, in your family, in your friend group to May Day, double that to 6 people for June 14th. Have a really achievable goal that you can easily meet, and maybe have the 3 people help you reach that 6 number. So the third step in this process is to build to 3.5%. Calculate with your group how many people 3.5% of your county is. Right? Counties come in all different shapes and sizes, but figure out for yours how many people 3.5% is, and brainstorm what spaces are you in to build to that number. Think about, maybe I'm in a community, a faith community, and maybe I can find new people there. Kind of like Akene was saying, find people that you're not already, in agreement with. Try to go out. We often stay in our own organizing bubbles and we don't try to reach out. But if we want to build to that 3.5% capacity, we have to reach out to new folks and involve them in organizing spaces. People who aren't typically activated, we have to activate them. And so think of, maybe as you're trying to think, what spaces could I build capacity in? Think of your identity. Maybe you're Unitarian. Shout out to all the Unitarians in the chat. Maybe you're part of maybe a faith community, or maybe you're part of a group, a book club that meets weekly. But think about your identity, the spaces you're in, and who you can reach in those spaces. So that's today's outreach tip. Akene, if there's anything I could have also mentioned, let everyone know. But we can move on to the next slide.
Just wrapped up our outreach tip. We are excited to introduce Eric Johnson from Corporate Accountability to give us today's digital hygiene tip. Eric, we can take the slide down.
Great. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. For today's digital hygiene tip, we are somewhat coincidentally going to be talking about passwords. Ideally, what makes a password strong, why a password manager might be useful to you. And we're also going to talk very briefly about what to do when your passwords or accounts become compromised and how to find out if they are. So, as we all know, we're like way more reliant on passwords than we ever have been. And like things like Zoom, all these different accounts that we get asked to add a new account for every day means it can be really hard to keep all those secure. When it comes to creating a password, there's really just 3 things that I think are important for everyone to remember. One is that you want to keep all of your passwords unique if possible. So that means not using the same password for different accounts. That can be tricky to do. I'll talk in a minute about some ways to do that effectively. The second priority would be the longer the password, the better. This actually means more than we thought it did a couple of years ago. By having a long password, it ensures that it's much harder to break, especially with a lot of tools and algorithms and other programs that are meant to break passwords. Length is one of the things that will really help. So for your most secure accounts, having a password that's 12 characters or longer is actually a really good idea. And then the last one, and I would say this is probably in priority order, is the complexity and randomness of the password. So this is where using numbers and symbols and random words can be really helpful. And to make sure that your passwords are hard to guess, either by a person or a program that is designed to guess what your passwords are to break into your accounts. So again, keep them unique, keep your passwords long, and make them complex and random. If you're like me, that means you would have to remember maybe hundreds of unique passwords, which is just like not really that feasible today when we're reliant on technology in so many different ways. So there's lots of ways to keep track of your passwords. One helpful tool for a lot of people that may make sense for you is to use a app or a program called the Password Manager. What this does is there's lots of examples of them. I can give some recommendations out in a minute. It's a program that stores all of your passwords in a safe location so that you don't have to remember all of them. Often these tools will also create random passwords for you, which is really nice. You don't have to think about, how am I going to make this one password more unique from the other one? It can just do it for you. It'll sync your passwords from different devices. And it's a much safer way to share passwords, like if with your coworkers, with family, friends, fellow activists, where you want to share resources. Doing that through a password manager is a lot more safe than texting or like sending that really private information out in a way that's not secure. The downsides to a password manager you might be thinking are, well, it does create a single point of failure, and that's true. So for any password manager that you do use, you want to make sure that the password for that password manager, which is basically the key to your kingdom, is extremely secure and is something that only you know and that you can remember. If you use it correctly, it can be a really helpful tool. So I'll share some recommendations of programs in the chat. There's tons out there. I see some questions about what happens if password managers get hacked? What happens if you forget it? These are all real concerns. I would look at the recommendations that I put in the chat, like Bitwarden and 1Password in particular, because they never have been hacked. And you want to look for a program that they don't actually have your information. So 1Password and Bitwarden are both examples of this, where even if they are hacked, there's nothing to hand over. So like that's what makes them really secure, is that those services can get hacked. You may have heard of LastPass. It's one of the most commonly used and most widely talked about programs. They were hacked a couple of years ago. So it is worth doing the research on the program that you're going to use. And yeah, Bitwarden is free, which is excellent. So there's some good ones out there. It's like everything else. There's no such thing as 100% secure. So you just want to do the best you can. And often a password manager is going to be better than using the same password all the time or having them written down on a piece of paper. The last thing I was going to talk about is, what do you do with compromised accounts? So regardless of what you do with your accounts, you could have the best security practices. You could do everything perfectly, and security breaches happen. And it's not even necessarily your fault. And in fact, it often isn't. If you think of the Equifax hack years ago, there's many examples of companies losing information, and your information then gets out there. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to have a unique password, because you don't want one account. So say your DoorDash account is leaked because DoorDash has a massive data breach. You wouldn't want your password for DoorDash to be the same as your bank account. So one of the other things you can do is, there's lots of tools to notify you about compromised accounts. In fact, many password managers have tools built into them that will tell you that, hey, this data breach happened with X company and your username and password has been compromised. You should reset it. I think Bitwarden and 1Password both have those features built in, but there's also free options. So one is, if you go to haveibeenpwned.com, which is haveibeen, pwned.com, you can put in your email address and it will tell you where your email address has been on data leaks that are publicly been disclosed. And then credit agencies, there's a bunch of services out there that can help to do this. So you can just basically Google like check haveibeenpwned.com. Yeah, we see it in the chat. That's one of the resources I would use. And then I'll put back in the list of recommendations. Essentially, Bitwarden and 1Password for individuals are great password managers. And then if you need something that's a little bit more administrative, NordPass is great. But yeah, I see lots of recommendations in the chat, so please feel free to share them. If you follow those basic steps, you should be able to keep most of your accounts more secure. So that's all I have for today. I'll pay attention to the chat and questions, but I will pass it back over to, I think. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Fantastic as always. So excited to introduce our speakers and trainers tonight. And our main trainer from the Kairos Center is Shally Barnes. She's the policy director of the Kairos Center and Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She has a background in law, economics, and human rights, and has been working with and for poor, low-income communities for nearly 20 years. So excited to hear what you have to teach us tonight. And then next slide. Our speaker on mutual aid is City Councilor Wendy Tuck from Parkersburg, West Virginia. Currently on the City Council, town of 28,000 people. She has her bachelor's in elementary education and her master's in special education, and she has an extensive background in social services and neighborhood organizing. You're going to learn so much from them tonight. So pleased and thank you for being here.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here with you all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all, everyone for joining us tonight. I realized that it wasn't easy. I also had a hard time getting here, but I appreciate that we are here together. Once again, my name is Shally Gupta Barnes. I'm with the Kairos Center, and I'm here today to share some lessons and insights on survival organizing, which may be in the form of mutual aid or a ministry or some other way that many of us are meeting material needs on a very regular basis. This is a practice that has always been important to poor people's movements, which is the history and organizing lineage that I come from. And it's increasingly important today for broader and broader segments of the population. So the question I think we have to ask ourselves, and what we're asking together, is how do we continue to meet the growing needs that people are going to have, especially as the systems that we rely on, every day are being defunded and dismantled and on the brink of collapse. How do we continue to meet those needs and build long-term power? How do we build a broad-based movement that's anchored in meeting needs and can move society in a different direction? So our agenda, which is on the screen right now, is, we'll quickly kind of do an overview of our political moment and how that's shaping the terrain we're on. We'll look at the lessons of poor people's movements and organizing, in particular from the Underground Railroad, and some pandemic experiences that were compiled in a recent report that we released from the Kairos Center. And then we'll look at a specific model that emerged from that research called Projects of Survival. And you'll have a chance to apply that model to the work that you're already a part of, many of you, and doing in your communities. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have access to the report, you'll have a worksheet that you can bring back and continue to work on, you'll have a song sheet, and happy to share these slides if that's also of interest. But first, though, I'm going to invite Wendy Tuck to share more about her work in West Virginia, and then we'll take it from there.
Our town is about 28,000 people, and I was elected in 2020. I live in a pretty poor part of Parkersburg, and it's about 2% non-white. So we're extremely white. But one of the things that was happening in my neighborhood is we had a ton of fires. We have a lot of abandoned buildings, and they were burning down. Um, and out of that came a need to try to figure out what to do with people that were didn't have housing. And so I started organizing housing expos. And the important thing I think for us was to really not not have people be passive, but we wanted them to come in and find the resources they needed so that they could get done what they needed to get done. And so our first one was in 2021, and we had, I don't know, probably 50 people come, and maybe 12 providers. We invited Habitat for Humanity, some shelters, and different groups that dealt with housing needs. And then the following year, we set a goal, and we said we want to help 50 people improve their housing. And so that year we had about 200 people come, and we had about 50 different providers. So there were banks, there were realtors, there were mobile home contractors, there were consumer credit, anybody that had anything to do with housing. And our town has about a 97% occupancy rate. So from top to bottom, housing is a real issue. It doesn't matter if you're poor or wealthy, there's just not enough housing. And so one of the beautiful things that we as organizers did was we brought everybody together. We brought, those who built really nice homes together with people that were living on the street, and also low income rentals and things like that. So it was phenomenal, and it was we actually helped about 500 people make some kind of improvement to their living conditions. And some of it happened right there on the spot. That there was a guy going out after the meeting, and I said, well, did you get what you came for? Did you find out what you needed? And he said, no. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, I'm a vet. I live under the bridge. I can't get housing. And there was a group called We Have Your Six. So I took him over there to them, and they were able to get him a house that night. So it was a networking, I think, where different people played a different part in the housing. Like some needed to get their credit raised, and some needed a ramp, and some needed repairs, and some needed down payment. So the city and the banks were working together, and landlords that usually rent to low income people could make sure their credit was verified. And so it was just a really, really exciting program for us. And so that group, so that we've had it for 3 years now. And then this winter, we met with a subgroup that mostly dealt with your low income, no income people. And actually, the timing was incredible. 2 days before we met, which was January 9th, West Virginia, our town had we knew that the temperatures were going to be dropping into single digits. And 2 days before we met, there'd been a lady that froze to death outside her tent. And that really mobilized the community. We really felt like we cannot let that happen. And so our 2 shelters jumped into action, and they're very restrictive in terms of separating male and female. You can't be high, a lot of rules. So there were 2 others. There was a day shelter and a small little church that was just full of recovered addicts. And it was just they just opened their doors and anyone could come in. And so different times they might have had 40 people in this tiny church, just packed. But what happened while they were in this shelter for a period of about 10 days is they really built relationships with the volunteers and the people that were coming by. And they got to know people. They went through the dope sick period. They came back down. They were able to be cared about, listened to, eating together. And I think about 30 actually went into rehab. Now, we had the one, we were the epicenter of the opioid epidemic. So it's an ongoing problem. But we just felt like we had never had this much success in getting people to leave the streets and go into treatment. So we felt like it was a really good, really successful thing. But it was really messy. It was really chaotic. You know, so many people were bringing over supplies, and some had too much toilet paper and some didn't have enough. And so we were trying to figure out how to get places. And another city councilor stepped in and organized a Facebook Facebook chain so people could find out who had coats, who had cots. The cots were actually at a correctional center, and the guy who ran the 911 center happened to know where they were, and so we were able to get cots. I mean, it was just this incredible working together. And so we really wanted to do it better next time. We said we don't want to do it like this. And so we started having debriefings and saying, well, what went well, what didn't go well. And we had about 3 of those. And then my fellow city councilor, we had a town hall, and our mayor and our city council had just cut off all public comments for the public. They could only speak on agenda items. So we started having town halls where people could discuss things on their mind. And at this town hall on reducing and ending homelessness, we had about 200 people that came, and we had a panel of 10, and they were service providers. They were people with lived experience, and it was an incredibly respectful group. And we learned a lot about the myths, really tried to get rid of the myths of they don't want to work. If they could just get a job, all those kind of things that don't help. And so after that meeting, then people were saying, well, what are the solutions? What do we do? So we had a couple more meetings, and then we called another community meeting. I feel like we're having a lot of meetings, but it was set up as a recruiting people to be a volunteer corps, so that we knew what the shelters needed. And we sort of said, okay, so let's have 7 pots of of what people can do. So we have building and maintenance, we have food preparation and finding food, we have resource drives, we have finance drives. And so we had about 106 people come to that town hall. So I feel like when you've got a very divided, polarized community, it was really important to find something that we are all impacted by. And unfortunately, drugs and homelessness are 2 areas that just affect everybody, regardless of their politics. So it's a really ongoing and a really exciting project. And I think we're learning a lot as we go. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the slideshow and the presentation. Thank you so much.
Wendy, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing in West Virginia, what you've been doing, and for sharing these experiences, which you describe as a lot of messiness, as a lot of meetings. I think many of us know that that's also where the miracles happen. So I appreciate it. And I think the themes you've laid out, we're going to see carry through the rest of today as well. So I'm just going to set my timer here, but we are going to go through and start with a little bit around our political moment. We could really spend all of our time on this, and we don't need to do that. I mainly just want to ground us in this current state of affairs and why that makes the survival organizing around basic needs so important. And in general, what we've seen in the first 100 days of this administration, what we can expect in the days and months ahead, is an implementation of the Project 2025 agenda, which I would characterize as having kind of 3 main planks. One, to dismantle government systems and agencies and programs, in particular programs of social uplift. Nearly half of Project 2025 is dedicated to decimating many of the public programs we need for a decent life. Two, it's to dismantle democracy and our ability to have a meaningful say in the decisions that shape our lives. And three, it's to consolidate power in the executive branch. And already the decisions that have been made are causing a lot of alarm and chaos. And we can anticipate that this is going to get worse as this agenda is further implemented through, what's happening with the federal budget. And if we can go to the next slide, we're really talking about tens of millions of people who will be adversely affected in the coming months. The graph on the right shows numbers that are pre-inauguration, before any of these cuts were in place. There were already 140 million people, 40% of the country, who were living below the poverty line or just one emergency above it. So many of them have already seen these emergencies, right? So we're now talking about 140 million people who are already not doing okay before any of these things have been going on, living in every county, state, and region of the country. This is a population that's disproportionately Black, Brown, and Indigenous, and also nearly half of that 140 million people are white. It's a population that's deeply divided by race, by party, but as Wendy, you reminded us, there are some things we have in common, right? We all need healthcare. We don't need safe communities, and we have to hold on to that because these cuts will be devastating to just about all of these people and many, many millions of more. So if we look at this terrain, that's one side of the terrain. These 140 million, many of us, and many more. And on the other side, if we go to the next slide, we'll see who's on the other side of this terrain. It's a much smaller number of people. The super wealthy and powerful. These are 5 of the wealthiest people in the world. It's a picture from the inauguration showing some of the billionaires who are there, whose wealth grew by billions and billions of dollars just last year. And not only that, they now stand to gain even more wealth from this extension of the tax cuts under Trump's first administration, as well as government contracts are going to, again, add up to tens of billions of dollars more. And so we have these two sides, right? And what keeps this small group of people, in this position of power and influence? Well, one, it's having, an administration that's willing to use force and violence to meet its agenda. And this agenda is defined by an age-old strategy of divide and conquer, right? This is on the next slide. We have a little cartoon that I've used for a long time with this. The strategy will tell us that, you're the problem, I'm the problem, that group over there, they're the problem. It'll tell us, like Wendy, you were mentioning, that we ourselves are the problem. If we only worked more, tightened our belts more, if we had better values, if we prayed harder, we'd all be okay. Well, that's not true. I think many of us have been doing that. We're not okay. And the reality is that a system that puts, the wealth and profits of a very few number of people over the well-being of the rest of us is the problem. And so we might know this, but the strategy of divide and conquer is very effective. It's partly how this small group has been able to gain power and influence over the past number of years. So our strategy, if we know who we are, right? We're 140 million strong, and we know who they are, and we know how they're going to try to divide us. Our strategy has to be a response to that. Instead of division, our strategy, which is on the next slide, has to be to fight for our unity, right? Fight for our unity with all those who are under attack right now and to build our power together. Just in the interest of time, I may not read this quote, but we can share it afterwards. This is from Reverend Dr. King as he was organizing the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. On the night before his assassination, he's in Memphis, Tennessee with the sanitation workers, and he makes this rousing call for unity, reminding everyone that Pharaoh used to use divide and conquer as well, but the moment that the slaves got together, that was the beginning of the ending of slavery. And this commitment to unity, that's exactly what we're doing. We're doing the kind of work that Wendy and others of us on this call have been doing to meet basic needs with and for each other. And if we can move from building community to building deep solidarity, we maybe also, use those activities to also build power. And that's a conversation we're going to be having tonight. So I want to pause for a second and maybe we could just turn to the chat, and it would be helpful to get a sense of, there are a couple questions I think on the next slide for you all to kind of mention in the chat. What worries you most about this political moment? There are many things that we're dealing with right now. And where do you see hope and opportunity? We'll just take a couple minutes to see what y'all are feeling, and then then we'll continue. We've already started. Yeah, so loss of democracy, absolutely. Loss of women's rights, losing our voices, harassment and danger, very aggressive division, celebration of cruelty. Yes, all of this, environmental destruction. Apathy is I think a big one. The possibility that we might lose people who no longer feel that they can make a difference, right? Disappearing people, the loss of our human rights. These are coming in so fast. I hope we can kind of share the chat with folks and see all these comments. What about, is anyone seeing hope or opportunity in this time? Collective learning, yes. The rise of community, building community. The level of grassroots organization, absolutely. I think many of us, and we'll get into this in the worksheet, are connected to real, motion on the ground that doesn't stop, where people are compelled to take certain actions. That's exactly what we're going to be seeing. Networking of grassroots groups, that's incredibly important to building power. Working collectively, yes. Mutual respect. Well, thank you all for these responses. Let's keep thinking about, let's keep this in mind as we kind of continue the conversation. I actually am going to invite on my colleague, cultural organizer and artist and musician with the Kairos Center, one of the founders of Dream Defenders, Sierra Taylor, who's going to lead us in a song, Set It Right Again.
Thank you so much, Shally. And thank you all for the work that you're doing in preparing our communities to take action. I think it's so important in this time. I'm going to share with you all this song. It's called Set It Right. It's written by singer, songwriter, cultural organizer Ana Hernandez that I've worked with in New York State. This song adapts a line from Sojourner Truth's stirring and courageous speech at the 1851 Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, when she said, "I've heard the Bible and I have learned that Eve caused man to sin. Well, if women upset the world, do give her a chance to set it right side up again." And so we believe that this song calls us to action when we contemplate there being a great trouble in this land, and that we are the ones. No one's going to come and save us. No one's going to come and give us what we need. We have to organize our communities to take it, but we are the ones to set it right again. And as the organizers of this call said at the beginning, there's a songbook that they'll be sharing with you all, full of songs like this one and others that you can use in your actions. This song is a good song to use as a call and response, and you'll see why. I love singing together. I wish we could all be singing together now, but alas, Zoom. So just if you feel comfortable, sing along with me. You'll be on mute, but you'll be singing with me. I'll feel it. Okay. So set it right again. There's a great trouble in the land. We're gonna set it right again. There's a great trouble in the land. We're gonna set it right again. There's a great trouble in the land. We're gonna set it right again. We're gonna set it right again. Trouble been brewing too many years. We're gonna set it right again. Trouble's been brewing too many years. We're gonna set it right again. Trouble been brewing too many years. We're gonna set it right again. We're gonna set it right. Set it right again. We need healing across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We need healing all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We need healing all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We're gonna set it right. Set it right again. We need justice across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We need justice all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We need justice all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We're gonna set it right. Set it right again. We're building a movement all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We're building a movement all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We're building a movement all across the land. We're gonna set it right again. We're gonna set it right. Set it right again. We're gonna set it right. Set it right again. Thank you all.
Sierra, thank you. I hope you see all the love for you and for this song in the chat. It's just very much where we're at and what we are committed to. So thank you for just lifting our spirits and reminding us that we can and will set it right. So how are we going to do that? It's not going to be easy, right? And so this is it's partly through what we're already doing in our communities, and then having to take that to scale, to connect it, to network it, to give it political direction and momentum. And this is where some lessons for history are really helpful, to see how this has happened before, to know that we aren't the first people or for the first time having to set things right again. And so before we get to some of the lessons from the Underground Railroad, I wanted to share just some grounding principles from Poor People's movements that are particularly relevant to where we're at right now and to survival organizing and to this model of projects of survival. The first is that poor and dispossessed people and people who are really on the front lines of a society's injustice, they're not just victims of that injustice. We are in fact agents of change. And it's our proximity to that injustice that makes us so, right? We both know the depth and degree of the harm and what it will take to repair that harm fully. So we are not just victims of injustice, but agents of transformational change. As we just talked about before Sierra got on, our ability to transform society, our ability to actually make that change possible depends on our unity and our consciousness of each other, our ability to come together across differences. And finally, the last principle is to always know and to believe that this isn't as good as it gets. It is possible. It is possible to end poverty and to end systemic injustice. And we hold out hope for more because we know we are deserving of more, and we tirelessly pursue that reality. So based on these principles, these are principles that have played out over and over again in US history, in world history, For those of you on the call who may be familiar with the Bible is basically a set of stories and lessons about how poor and dispossessed people organized and applied these principles. These are lessons from history. They applied these ideas to against empire, and they won. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll start by, we're not going to look at the Bible tonight, unfortunately, maybe another time, but we'll look instead at the Underground Railroad. Which is a powerful example of not both these principles, but what survival organizing looks like on a mass scale and how it can give direction and momentum to a liberation movement. So usually when we think about the Underground Railroad, we look at this, we think about this map on the left, right? These big arrows of motion from the south to the north, or from enslavement towards freedom. And that is a lot of what it looked like. But if we were to peel, if we were to zoom in, it would also look like this map on the right, which shows the state of Ohio and a constellation of dots of activity. Each of those dots is a household, a church, a school, some kind of community-based effort to meet very concrete material needs on the road to freedom, right? This was a network that was created after enslaved people freed themselves. That was the first act of freedom. And as they did so, as they made their way towards freedom, they created the need and the possibility for an Underground Railroad, for this network. Much of it was actually held down by formerly enslaved people and those who they influenced and pulled in along the way. And it's interesting to know also that this network was dismissed at first. It wasn't taken seriously as political work. But eventually it became very clear that the political work of abolition had to be grounded out of these kinds of networks, out of meeting the material needs of enslaved people and learning the lessons that were coming from their experiences, learning the tactics and the strategies of how they were confronting violence, and the systemic injustice. That came to inform and shape the rest of the abolitionist movement. In fact, much of this network also laid the foundation for Reconstruction after the Civil War through these communities, these permanently organized communities that were taking action together around meeting concrete needs, and gave rise to this Underground Railroad, which eventually, is what brought direction and momentum to a broader political movement for liberation. It's an incredibly powerful history, and we draw on it today. We continue to draw on its lessons for today. You can see in the next slide, we used a reference to the Underground Railroad in our report on survival strategies from the pandemic. So you can see, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the book Show Way. It's a children's book, but it talks about, using the stars to kind of map the road to freedom. And that imagery informed, the cover for this report that we put out earlier this year called A Matter of Survival, where you can see in the constellations the kinds of activities that people took on for their communities, for themselves, when government systems and society failed us, since 2020 and, before that for sure, but since 2020 and then beyond. And so I wanted to share a few examples from that report, again, in the spirit of how Wendy shared earlier. So to remind us of the incredible work that is already ongoing in our communities, some of which you may be connected to already, some familiar, hopefully you'll hear something familiar in some of these stories. So if we can go to the next one, yes. Okay, so this is the first one I wanted to talk about were these Nelsonville community dinners. These were started by a group of volunteers, started off as a spaghetti dinner for 12 kids after school in Nelsonville, Ohio, which is, in Appalachia. And the kids didn't want to go home for many reasons. And so a couple volunteers started the spaghetti dinner. And within a matter of weeks, it turned from a spaghetti dinner for a dozen kids to hundreds of people in this small town coming together to share a meal, hundreds of poor people. And those meals were a miracle every week, the volunteers would describe. They didn't know where things were coming from. And all of a sudden there'd be fresh fruit, and there'd be all kinds of, there'd be household goods, there'd be clothing. And this community formed around this central need to feed people and to build community. And they would start every meal with a ritual where they would share something that happened during the week. It might be that someone welcomed a new batch of kittens, or someone had an appointment for a job, had an interview for a job, or someone got a driver's license. So they had these rituals that they would do to build that community. And over time, what happened was, during the pandemic, they shifted to meal deliveries, again, reaching hundreds of people in the community. And when a law was being proposed that would move their polling station to a different location, that would make it harder for especially the poor people in Nelsonville to make it, to go vote, it was this community that talked about it with each other and went to the city council and pushed back and kept that law from being passed. Right. So it went from a dinner and that building community to taking action together. And it was significant. It made a significant difference in the lives of a lot of people. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And unfortunately, we don't have any pictures, but this is an immigrant rights organization in New York called Drum, that had never really done direct service or mutual aid work for their members before. They've been organizing for, more than 20 years, 25 years. And it wasn't something that they had made a decision not to incorporate that in their work until the pandemic, when, just most of their community had no information, were completely isolated from government supports and other things. And they just had to step in and fill these gaps. And once they did, what happened was they came to see a whole other level of leadership, a whole other form of leadership within their existing membership base. People who would never be out front at a rally, people who would never, be the charismatic person talking to everybody, but who were broadly trusted, who knew who was vulnerable, who was willing to do the work of, making the food, delivering the food, who knew all the gaps and cracks and was willing to fill them. And that too is a form of leadership for these times. An incredibly important lesson. The next slide shows Reverend Dorlamar from the People's Church in Harlem. She's up there on the left. And during what happened during the pandemic at the People's Church in East Harlem was they changed the whole way church was done, right? So this was a Methodist church, and they worked together with 4 other churches in the area. So these 5 churches came together to operate as one church with 5 sites. So Reverend Dorlamar, for instance, only had to preach once every 5 weeks. And what that opened up in terms of her capacity, in terms of the communities, her ability to turn the capacity and resources of the church open, to the community and its needs, she described as yet another miracle. And she described them as living out the parables of Jesus every day. An incredibly powerful kind of reorientation of what church is. The next example, let's see. This was a community school in the largest rural county of New York, in North Country. And this community school was set up, it's a public school that's set up also to provide for wraparound services for poor and low-income children. And because they had the structure in place already, they became a hub of all kinds of activity. Their staff described them as becoming, the center of the universe, not just in their school district, but for the county as a whole. And that they continue to play that role today. So again, another way to think about these public institutions that we have, the few that remain, and how we can turn them to meet our needs in times of crisis. And then the last example I have from the report, I believe, is also from West Virginia. Yes, so West Virginia Can't Wait is a political organization in West Virginia that turned their electoral outreach into a joint mutual aid effort in 2020. And so all of their volunteers were tasked to were assigned basically, certain specific geographic locations, and had to be in touch with a certain number of people a certain number of times. And through that, they built even deeper relationships than what they had before. They were providing needs, they were talking about elections. And when it came time to vote in 2020, where they had these neighborhood captains programs set up, turnout was double digits higher than in places that didn't have that set up. And so this relationship between meeting people's needs and political outcomes is so strong. And in fact, some others who are part of a political movement that we are up against, they know this better than we do in many ways. If we can go to the next slide, I wanted to also provide a counter example, right? There are political forces, there are regressive religious institutions that are very good at using churches and ministries to meet people's needs, to provide disaster relief and pull people into their movement, right? This is a story that was in Mother Jones at the end of 2024 about a ministry in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called Blessings of Hope that feeds 50,000 people a week. We don't have anything close to this scale of activity, like on a mass scale, right? Let alone the resources and that's coordinated around the same political orientation. So I offer this as an example, as a reminder, sorry, that when we do this work of meeting people's needs, it cannot be out of charity. It must be out of a necessity, right? This understanding that we need to do this for ourselves as well as our neighbors, to realize the society we want, not the one we have and not the one we fear is coming. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. And I think now we have some time to work on your own on these worksheets. We have, I think, 4, 5, 6 minutes or so. There are 3 parts to this worksheet that everyone should have access to. And it's just kind of working through kind of mapping what you're connected to, what needs are being provided for, and what your role is in that work. So yeah, not sure how best to run the timer. I don't know, Kaden or others on the call who've been doing this, maybe you can jump in. Oh, I see. There's the worksheet. And I think we just have a few minutes on this timer to go through these couple of questions. And again, this is just to kind of get us thinking about what are we already connected to? We may not need to start something new in our communities, right? There's a lot of ongoing activity. So what are we connected to? What kind of needs are they providing for? And then after this, we'll go to a next question about what your role is in these activities. If for whatever reason the worksheet isn't working for you, if you have a piece of paper nearby, you can also just kind of map down and list what you're connected to and what kind of needs it's providing for. Sometimes technology doesn't quite work for us. So as this clock winds us down here, just be mindful, there's one other question that we'll be turning to, after you've listed the things that you may be connected to in your community that are providing for material needs and what kind of needs they're providing for. The last question that we'll take a couple minutes for is, what is your role in these different activities? And you may have many roles. You may be a volunteer, you may be a recipient, you may be a staff, you may be, a pastor or a counselor, you may be an artist, you may be a participant. So any of these roles are part and parcel of what it takes to build these projects in your community. So yeah, let's just take a few minutes to consider what our role is in this work. And if people are also, if you're done answering these questions, feel free to also add what's coming to mind in the chat so we can get a sense of what people are doing and what that looks like. There's a lot of great work people are doing. Both around civil rights, housing rights, education, poverty, culture. It's great to see. Food justice. A lot of work in churches. That's not a surprise in a lot of places. Churches, as you all know, kind of are the last remaining institution standing, that have their doors open for people from birth, from the moment we enter the world till we leave. Adult literacy, it's great. Journalism and volunteering. There's a phrase in our work, a catchphrase. It says, movements begin with the telling of untold stories. So I hope you're telling some of those untold stories in your journalism. Building queer safe community, beautiful. So, I mean, this is in part a reminder that there is so much going on, right? People who are in crisis. The people who are in crisis do not stop, right? We don't wait for people to save us, we take action. And so, so I think it's important just to remember that we don't always have to, as Wendy started us off saying, we don't have to recreate the wheel at all times. Sometimes there are things that are ongoing that we can connect with. So it's important to get a sense of all of that. So I want to take us one step deeper into the specific model of projects of survival. And how do we move from these kinds of actions that people are connected to, the kinds of actions we're taking, to a broader, networked, politicized movement that's anchored in those projects, and then oriented towards shifting the whole of society. So out of the lessons of the Underground Railroad and other poor people's movement and the pandemic, in the report that I mentioned earlier, we articulated a model for projects of survival as a model of organizing in the times of crisis that we're in right now. And there are two fundamental parts to this model. One is the day-to-day work of meeting unmet needs, right? That's the basis, that's the foundation. And then two is a set of principles that can be applied to politicize that organizing, to build solidarity, raise our political consciousness, and move us towards long-term movement building. So the next couple slides, we'll walk through these two different parts, and then we'll go back and try to apply this again to your context and your work and your community. Sorry, again, just kind of setting my timer here. So this first part of the model is, the day-to-day work of meeting material needs. Now, first, you have to meet that need consistently, same place, same time, for free, or with very few strings attached, right? There has to be a very low barrier of entry. And it has to be the kind of thing where everyone interested in playing a role has a role to play, that there's a way to incorporate more and more people into that activity to build community and build leadership. And community is a key word here. The activity has to be anchored not in service delivery, right, but in building that community. We break through that us and them dichotomy and build the sense of we through the activity, through the actions we're taking together. And oftentimes what happens is then as that community is building through this meeting of material needs, there's a sense of political awakening. There's an awakening of people's political agency. One of the examples that I found, a couple examples that we found during the pandemic was, when domestic workers, for instance, who were being asked to take COVID tests before they showed up for work, started asking their employers to also take COVID tests, right? They kind of flipped the script and said, we are just as important as you are, and our safety matters just as much as yours. When tenants, low-income tenants, decided they were going to stop paying rent when they went on rent strike. They flipped the category that they were in, that was tenants, and they stayed in their apartments, but they refused to do the defining activity of a tenant, was to pay rent. They said, we're going to withhold our rent to feed our families, because that was more important. So they recognize their political agency by taking that action together. And sometimes when that happens, when it gets to that point, eventually that community becomes the target of an attack. The Dinners in Nelsonville, they were kicked out of multiple churches, for instance, because there were too many poor people. They were too loud. They were worried about lice. They were worried about other things, theft. And so, that's part of what happens when a project of survival is consistently building community. This is kind of the cascade of events that it encounters. Now, the second part is, how do we, as we're engaging in these activities, raise our political consciousness of the people engaged in that work, but also the people around us. And so these are more guiding principles of how we do that. There's nothing specific that, it could take as many forms as we have ideas, right? So it's contextualizing the work we're doing within a framework of abundance, that all of our needs can be met instead of a scarcity model. It's really centering the leadership and the agency of those who are most affected by systemic injustice. It's making an effort to prioritize political education, to understand why are we in the situation together, right? This can be through reading something together. It could be through Bible study. It could be through through singing songs together, through visiting each other's homes and just having meaningful conversations. There are so many ways to kind of apply these principles to the work that you do of meeting people's needs. There's kind of anchoring that work and believing in our fundamental human decency and goodness, that we are both capable of change, but also that we have a goodness in us that we can tap into and release into the world, and that will make that possibility exists. And then, as I've mentioned numerous times at this point, it's really using art and culture and music and ritual to build community and to build power. Again, this can be through song, art builds, or making meals together. It could be thinking about how a room is set up, or, the idea is that through these principles, we infuse the day-to-day work we're doing together to raise our political consciousness of the activity we're doing within the broader context of the community we're building, again, within the broader context, and any, resistance that we're going to start to be feeling. Where is that coming from, and why is it coming towards us, and what can we do about that together? So I'm going to ask us now, this might be a little bit harder. It's part 2 of the worksheet, if you're able to open that up. But it's to focus on a couple of activities that you may have listed before. And just to see what elements of the first part of the model are present in that work. Is it broad enough to welcome everyone who wants to be involved? Has it come under any attack? What makes some of this work hard? What are the challenges that it faces? And then I wanted to spend a little bit of time about a dynamic that I think we see across a lot of this meeting and materials work, a lot of the survival organizing, is this us-them dynamic, this notion of charity. How do we break through that to build real solidarity? So just wondering how, if that dynamic exists in the activity that you're thinking about and you're focused on, how could applying some of those principles in the second part of the model help you break through them? Is there something you could read together? Is there a story you could tell? Is there some other way to organize that activity to start to break that dynamic? Not everything's going to happen all at once, but could we start to use those principles to target one of the weaknesses that keep this activity in a more limited category than it could be? So I'll pause here. Do we have a timer for this one? Well, maybe we can
No, we
spend,
don't.
okay. Maybe we could just spend 3 or 4 minutes, or people can also put their comments and thoughts in the chat and use the worksheet for future reference in your community, just as the basis of more conversation with the people that you're building with. But I'll pause for about, 4 minutes or so. I see a comment in the chat about the us-them point. So a lot of times in some of the work we may be doing around material needs, there's this idea that there's a group of people that collect a bunch of things, and there's a group of people who receive a bunch of things from whatever's been collected, right? And there's those of us who do this thing, there's the them who do that thing. And that lends itself towards a charity type model, right? Where people get kind of anchored in those different roles and can't see necessarily that in fact there's a whole ecosystem that's developing together. And if it was anchored around this idea of we are in this, putting all these things together, then this might look different. So for instance, the community dinners, they were, volunteers, as many, people could show up. It was at the same time every week. And people sometimes showed up hours earlier just to sit down and talk or be helpful. So people knew where they could go. And some of the children would get involved in writing the menu and setting the table. And there was always something that anyone could get involved in: cutting the vegetables, preparing the table, inviting people to sit down, right? There are all these different roles that could be played that really created a community, a community of practice where it was a we, and people didn't see themselves as I'm behind the table over here serving you. I may be behind the table today, but tomorrow I'm going to be receiving food from you, or next week I'll be receiving food from you on the other side of this table. So that's part of that dynamic that we want to be breaking, or at least kind of breaking down, to move towards stronger solidarity and unity. I hope that's helpful. So we'll just have a few more seconds here. And then we'll turn towards, we're getting towards the end of our time. So we just have a few more things that I wanted to cover. And again, this is very much the start of a conversation, I believe, not the beginning and end of one. So what I wanted to say, as much as we know that survival organizing, projects of survival have, anchored the Underground Railroad, anchored some of the most powerful social movements in US history and in world history, they are not and cannot possibly be the whole of what a movement is. They are where we meet people, where we can meet needs, where we can raise the social contradictions of a society that will not and chooses not to provide for us all. They're where we can build a base of operations and this, and this idea of being kind of in long-term relationship with each other. But there are many other components to a movement that we also need to take into account and that projects of survival need to relate to. I would describe a project of survival as a form of protest, right? It's showing that we are willing to take care of each other, even if society chooses not to. That is a form of protest, period. There are also more escalated forms of protest. If we think about the Underground Railroad, all the illegal actions, right? Once the fugitive slave laws are passed, the act of freeing yourself or, aiding or working with a fugitive slave was illegal. There were all the insurrections. There was the refusal to fight in the war, the general strike. These were all escalated forms of protest that were very much connected to Project of Survival, but had a more militant character to them, right? Through that program, through these activities, through all of these protests, movements also need demands. They need a program that cohere all of that activity together. And that program has to be communicated somehow, right? It has to reach people. There has to be a press arm of a movement to reach beyond the audiences already involved. And importantly, movements cannot be organized around individual personalities, right? We need long-term plans. I think too many movements have been cut short. We know this. Too many movements have been cut short by relying on charismatic leadership. And instead, we need deep benches of leaders in every community who can carry forward the demands and program of the movement until they're realized. In other words, we need many Harriets, many John Browns, many Martins, many Corettas, many of the manys, and a process of political education through all of these different pieces can help develop that leadership and secure it for however long we need it to be. So these are all, I just wanted to mention that and put Projects of Survival within this broader context of how we're going to build this movement, right? They are essential to the moment we're in, to the political necessities of this moment, and to what we're going to have to do to build. And as we're doing that, let's also start to see the other pieces of this movement coming together. So one thing you might consider is the third part of a worksheet. We don't have time to do it now, unfortunately, but to think about, are there other actions going on in your community that you may be not connected to? Are there escalated forms of action going on? Walkouts, hunger strikes, rent strikes? Are there encampments? Especially illegal encampments, and what would it mean to connect with that activity? Would that add to the work you're already doing? Would it take away from it? I think it's important to just interrogate, a relationship to all of these forms of protest and put what we are connected to in relationship with each other to consider, what would it take to build political power Because that's a fundamental question, right? What is it going to take to build political power that undergirds that broader movement? And it could be that any of these are that spark, right? And so part of this exercise is to map what we're connected to, what we're not connected to, and how can we build that connection? How can we pull more of those dots, right, in our lives together to start to build those networks of towards freedom and liberation. So that kind of wraps our training for this evening, I believe. If there are any questions about this content or the slides or any of this, very happy to be in touch with folks. And you can also find us at kairoscenter.org and on social media. I don't know if I have those handles and things, but I can find them and share them with the hosts. So thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Shelly, and thank you so much to our awesome presenters, Wendy and Eric Johnson from Corporate Accountability for being here tonight and taking the time to be with us. Again, so sorry for the technical issue that we had earlier, but appreciate all who were able to stay on for the full training. If we could pull the slides up one last time as we get ready to close out with our song, that'd be fantastic. But again, just really appreciate everyone being here. A reminder to go to nokings.org and prepare to mobilize for June 14th. We'll follow up with the June 7th organizing training that Indivisible is hosting to help folks prepare to mobilize. So if we could, fantastic. Reminder to that our next training is next Thursday on May 22nd from 8 to 10 p.m. or 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific time on advanced strategic organizing skills and choosing your tactics. And this is where we're going to begin really building out in our groups, in the groups that we're in the spaces that we're gathered, how we want to strategize and build off of what we've learned and begin applying what we've learned. So what tonight's song, closing out song is Little Light.
Could I just share a word about the song?
Yes, please.
It's not very well produced, or it's not, highly produced or something, but it came together impromptu as a bunch of artists and organizers were making art together, and it was captured live. And again, it's part of our songbook that we'll be making available for No King's Day and other versions. But it's an adaptation. The lyrics are an adaptation to a song that should be familiar to most of us, called This Little Light of Mine. So
and I do want to take a moment and acknowledge and appreciate Shelly and also Sierra for singing and for compiling tonight's list of songs. Thank you so much. It was an awesome lineup and really excited to hear this last one and share it with everyone. So without further ado, let's.
This justice. Peace you feed the mind, a marching for justice. Peace you feed the mind, a marching for justice. Giving hopes on the road to revival. Peace you feed the mind, he's calling for revival. This here faith of mine, he's calling for revival. This here faith of mine, he's calling for revival. Calling out, calling out, calling out. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. It won't stop till justice comes. No, it won't stop till justice comes. No, we won't stop till justice comes.
Thanks again all so much for joining tonight's training. We'll see you again next week, Thursday, the 22nd, at 5 or 8 p.m. For our advanced strategic organizing skills and choosing your tactics training. Have a great evening, y'all. Stay safe and take care.